I froze, my frail fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as I stared at the screen in front of me. The footage was grainy, lit by the faint glow of the dining room chandelier. But I didn't need perfect clarity to see it. My husband Richard, the man who had promised to love and protect me for the rest of my life, was standing in our dining room at 3:14 a.m., whispering into his phone. His voice was low, urgent, almost trembling. "It's done. She doesn't suspect a thing." My stomach turned. The screen flickered as he paced across the room, his polished loafers tapping against the hardwood floor. Then he glanced toward the stairs, as if making sure I wasn't awake, and said something that made my knees buckle. "We'll move the rest tonight. No one will ever know." I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, a dull, heavy thud that made me aware of just how old I was. 82 years, and suddenly feeling every one of them. I had installed the cameras just a week earlier, telling Richard it was for security, but in truth I had been following my gut. His strange looks, the unholy hour calls, the unexplained trips to the foundation office. But I never imagined I'd see this. And then, just before the footage cut to black, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He opened it, stared at something inside, and whispered, almost to himself, "She won't survive this." The footage ended. My hands were trembling so violently that the mouse slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. I backed away from the desk, my mind spiraling. Survive what? What had he done? What was he planning? And why did his voice sound so final? I wasn't just shaken. I was terrified. But to understand how I got to this moment, I have to take you back. Back to the beginning, when I thought marrying Richard was the best decision of my life. My name is Margaret Langford. Most folks just call me Maggie. I'm an 82-year-old retired nurse from Wilmington, North Carolina. I have pale skin, the kind you have to protect from the sun, and hair that stayed stubbornly blonde. Well, with a little help from the salon every now and then. My life before Richard was quiet, lonely even. I'd outlived 2 close friends, my younger sister moved to Arizona, and my only daughter passed away in a car accident almost 20 years ago. I'd sworn off romance. My age, love seemed like something for other people. But then came Richard. Charming, broad-shouldered even at 75, with a warm smile and the kind of old-fashioned manners you don't see anymore. We met at a charity luncheon at the country club. He was the guest of honor, a philanthropist who'd funded schools, hospitals, and food banks across the state. He asked if he could walk me to my car, and before I knew it, we were sharing Sunday dinners, taking slow walks along the pier, and sitting in his study as he told me stories about the people he'd helped. He made me feel young again. When he proposed, it was like something out of a movie. Candlelight, champagne, his hand warm over mine. I said yes without hesitation. For the first 2 years, life was bliss. We hosted charity galas, traveled to Europe, donated to causes close to my heart. Everyone in Wilmington adored him, and I adored him most of all. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Started with the phone calls. Always late at night, always taken in another room. Then the mood swings. He'd be warm and attentive one moment, then distant and irritable the next. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his eyes unreadable. When I asked what was wrong, he'd smile and say, "Nothing, sweetheart. Just tired." But I knew better. Years of nursing had taught me to read people, and something in Richard's demeanor set off alarms in my head. The final straw came 3 weeks ago, on our wedding anniversary. He claimed he had to leave our dinner early for an urgent board meeting. I smiled and kissed him goodbye, but inside my chest felt hollow. That night, while he was out, I installed tiny wireless cameras in the dining room, kitchen, and study. I told myself it was paranoia, that I'd watch the footage later and feel foolish. But the footage I saw tonight, it wasn't paranoia. It was confirmation. And now I was sitting in the dark, shaking, wondering just how deep this went. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I couldn't confront him, not yet. I needed more information. Proof. Whatever Richard was doing, it was bigger than I'd imagined, and one wrong move could tip him off. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times. My skin prickled when I heard the faint sound of a door opening downstairs. Richard was home. The front door clicked shut, and my entire body stiffened. I could hear the familiar sound of his polished shoes crossing the marble entryway. Slow, deliberate steps that echoed like a metronome counting down the seconds I had before he saw me. I swiveled back toward the desk, closing the camera feed window with trembling hands and pulling up an old crossword puzzle on the screen. My breathing slowed, my lips pressing into a thin line as I forced myself to look casual. "Maggie!" His voice was deep and smooth, the same tone that had once made me feel safe. Now it sent a shiver down my spine. "In here, sweetheart," I called, keeping my tone light. He appeared in the doorway, his silver hair slightly mussed, his tie loosened. He looked like a man coming home after a long day, but his eyes were scanning me the way a hawk sizes up a rabbit. "What are you doing up at this hour?" he asked, glancing at the clock. Gave a small shrug. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd work on a puzzle. You know how my mind gets restless." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should get some rest. It's late." I nodded, rising from the chair. As I passed him, I caught the faint scent of cigar smoke mixed with something else, something metallic like blood. My stomach twisted, but I kept walking, feeling his gaze burn into my back until I disappeared up the stairs. In our bedroom, I lay in bed pretending to sleep while my mind worked like an engine in overdrive. I replayed the words from the footage over and over in my head. "She won't survive this. Did he mean me?" By morning, Richard was all smiles again. He brewed my coffee just the way I liked it, kissed me on the cheek, and told me he had meetings all day. If I didn't know better, I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing. But the image of that velvet pouch wouldn't leave my mind. That morning I made a decision. If Richard had secrets, I was going to find them. I started with his study. It was his sanctuary. No one but him went in there, not even the cleaning staff. While he was gone, I slipped inside, closing the heavy oak door behind me. The room smelled faintly of leather and whiskey. His desk was immaculate, every pen aligned, every paper stacked. But locked drawers had always been my enemy, and Richard's desk had 3 of them. I tried the obvious, checking under the blotter for a spare key, but found nothing. Then I remembered an old trick from my nursing days. I grabbed a paperclip from the top drawer, straightened it, and jiggled it inside the lock. It took longer than I expected. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but finally, with a soft click, the drawer slid open. Inside was a manila folder labeled Haven Foundation, private. The Haven Foundation was Richard's pride and joy, a non-profit he claimed helped women and children in crisis. But as I flipped through the papers, my brow furrowed. These weren't donation receipts or program reports. They were bank statements. And the numbers didn't make sense. Large sums were being transferred every few weeks to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. And then I saw it, my name. One of the withdrawals was marked under my signature. So, I had never signed anything like that in my life. My pulse quickened. Forgery. Fraud. And if this was tied to that late-night call, I was in deeper than I thought. I took out my phone and snapped pictures of every page, tucking the papers back exactly as I found them. I had just clicked the drawer shut when I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Maggie!" Panic surged through me. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. I shoved the paperclip in my pocket, grabbed the nearest book from the shelf, and opened it as the door swung open. "There you are," Richard said, his gaze flicking to the desk. "What are you doing in here?" "Looking for something to read," I said with a smile that felt glued to my face. "You have so many wonderful books, I thought I'd borrow one." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You know this is my private space." I laughed softly. "You make it sound like I'm trespassing in my own home." His expression didn't change. He walked past me, opened the desk drawer, the very one I'd unlocked, and rifled through it. My stomach knotted. If he noticed anything was out of place, I was finished. But after a moment, he closed it, turned, and gave me that charming smile again. Of course. Just ask me next time, okay? Of course, I said, my voice steady despite the fact my knees were shaking. That night I barely slept. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Richard's philanthropy wasn't as pure as it seemed. But why forge my name? And what was in that velvet pouch? I decided I needed more than camera footage. I needed to see what he was doing when he thought I wasn't watching. So, the next morning, I told him I had a doctor's appointment and wouldn't be home until late afternoon. In truth, I parked 2 blocks away from the Haven Foundation office and waited. An hour later, Richard's black Mercedes pulled into the lot. I watched him get out, greet a tall man in a gray suit, and carry a small box inside. It wasn't the velvet pouch, but my instincts screamed that whatever was inside was connected to all of this. I waited another hour before slipping out of my car and walking toward the building. The glass doors were locked, but the reception area was visible from the street. It was empty. Circling to the back, I spotted a service door propped open with a cardboard box. Inside was a dim hallway lined with storage rooms. I crept along, ears straining for any sound. Voices drifted from a room at the end of the hall. Once she's out of the picture, the accounts will be fully accessible, a man said. My breath caught. And no one will suspect. Richard's voice. Not a soul, the man replied. It'll look like natural causes. Natural causes. My blood ran cold. I leaned closer, trying to hear more, but my elbow brushed against a metal cart, sending it clattering to the floor. The voices went silent. I turned and ran, my shoes slipping on the linoleum as I bolted back to the service door. I made it to the parking lot just as the door slammed open behind me. Richard's voice shouted my name, sharp and commanding. I didn't look back. I jumped into my car, fumbling with the keys, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Richard standing in the doorway, his face a mask of pure rage. I sped off, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. By the time I reached home, I knew 2 things for certain. Richard was planning something that could kill me, and I had very little time to stop him. I grabbed my phone and dialed the only person I could trust, Detective Laura Whitman, an old patient of mine from my nursing days who owed me a favor. Laura, I said, my voice trembling, I think my husband is trying to kill me. There was a long pause on the other end. Maggie, she said slowly, where are you right now? In my kitchen, I whispered. Get out of the house, she said. Right now. The phone went dead in my hand, though I could still hear Detective Laura's voice echoing in my mind. Get out of the house. Right now. I grabbed my purse, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and headed for the garage. Every instinct screamed that if Richard came back before I left, I might not make it out. I had just reached for the garage door opener when I froze. Car engine rumbled in the driveway. Peeking through the narrow side window, I saw the black Mercedes. My heart plunged into my stomach. He was home. And earlier than usual. I swallowed hard, my eyes darting around. If I ran for the back door, he'd see me. If I stayed, he'd know I was on edge. I needed to disappear before he stepped inside. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. I darted to the pantry, slipped inside, and shut the door as quietly as I could. My breathing sounded deafening in the tiny space, my chest rising and falling too fast. The front door opened. Maggie! His voice carried through the house, smooth but with an undertone I'd begun to recognize. An edge like a man playing nice because it suited him, not because he meant it. I clamped my hand over my mouth and stayed perfectly still. Maggie! The sound of his shoes moved through the foyer, then into the living room. Cupboards opened, drawers shut. He was looking for me. In the darkness of the pantry, my mind whirled. My phone was in my purse, which I'd left on the kitchen counter. If I could just get to it, I could text Laura again. But moving now would be like stepping into a spotlight. The sound of his footsteps grew closer. He was in the kitchen now. I heard the scrape of a chair being moved, the click of the fridge door. And then silence. It stretched so long I almost convinced myself he'd left the room, until the pantry door swung open. I nearly screamed. "There you are," he said, smiling faintly. "Why are you hiding in here?" I forced a laugh, my mind scrambling for an excuse. I wasn't hiding. I was looking for the jar of peach preserves we got from the farmer's market. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, studying me. "You've been acting strange lately." I met his gaze, willing my voice not to shake. "Strange how?" "You tell me," he said softly. "You disappear without telling me where you're going. You spend hours alone in the study. And now you're hiding in the pantry." Shrugged. "Sometimes I just need a little space, Richard. You know that." For a long moment we just looked at each other. Then he smiled again, stepping aside. "Well, if you find those preserves, bring them out. I'm making tea." As soon as he left the kitchen, I slipped my phone out of my purse, turned it on silent, and texted Laura. "He's home. I can't leave yet." Her reply came quickly, "Play along. I'm on my way." The next half hour was a nightmare of polite conversation over tea. Richard asked about my day, complimented the blouse I was wearing, even offered to take me out for dinner later. But every time I looked into his eyes, I saw the man from the camera footage. The man who had whispered, "She won't survive this." At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were warm, his smile gentle. But his grip was just a little too firm. "I'm glad we have this time together," he said. "It's important for couples to trust each other, don't you think?" My throat went dry. "Of course." The sound of tires crunching on the driveway made me jump. Richard's eyes flicked toward the window. "I'll get it," I said quickly, standing before he could. I stepped outside, my heart racing, only to see Laura's unmarked sedan. Relief flooded me. "Maggie," she said, striding up the walk, her expression tense. "We need to talk. Now." Richard appeared in the doorway behind me, smiling as though greeting an old friend. "Detective. What a surprise." "Mr. Langford," she said with a polite nod. "Mind if I borrow your wife for a few minutes?" "Of course," he said smoothly. "Take all the time you need." We walked down the street, far enough that the house was out of sight. "What's going on?" she asked in a low voice. I told her everything, about the footage, the velvet pouch, the forged signature, and what I'd overheard at the Haven Foundation. Laura's face darkened. "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just domestic trouble. This is criminal. Potentially organized crime." Chill ran through me. Organized crime. "It would explain the offshore accounts and the careful planning," she said. "And if he's using your name in these transactions, he's setting you up to take the fall if anything goes wrong." My stomach dropped. "So even if I survive, I could end up in prison." "Exactly." She looked me dead in the eye. "We need to get hard evidence before we can move. That means more than camera footage. We need the contents of that velvet pouch and a direct link to those accounts." I swallowed. "That means I have to stay." She hesitated, then nodded. "For now. But I'll have an undercover unit keep an eye on the house. If he makes a move, we'll be ready." That night, back in the house, I tried to act normal. I made dinner, asked about his day, even laughed at one of his jokes. But inside, my nerves were fraying. After dinner, Richard went into his study, locking the door as always. I took the opportunity to slip into the guest room, the one he never used, and set up one of my old baby monitors from when my daughter was alive. I'd hidden the receiver in my nightstand. If he so much as made a call in that room, I'd hear it. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a faint crackle from the monitor. "Tomorrow night," Richard's voice said. "We'll do it then." Another voice, too faint to recognize, asked something I couldn't make out. "She'll be gone," Richard said. "No one will suspect." I pressed my ear to the speaker, straining to catch more. And then, clear as a bell, "Make sure the injection is ready." My blood ran cold. An injection. I knew what that meant. I grabbed my phone to text Laura, But before I could, I heard the sound of footsteps in the hall. They were coming toward my room. The footsteps grew louder in the hallway, slow and deliberate, like someone measuring each step. I slipped my phone under my pillow and pulled the blanket up to my chin, forcing my breathing into a slow, steady rhythm as if I were asleep. The doorknob turned. The faint click of the latch echoed in the stillness, followed by the soft creak of the door opening. I kept my eyes closed, but I could feel him, Richard, standing there watching me. Seconds ticked by. My ears rang with the sound of my own heartbeat. Then the floorboards creaked as he stepped inside. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something faintly medicinal. The air seemed to thicken around me. He stopped beside my bed. I fought the urge to flinch when I felt the edge of the blanket being lifted ever so slightly, just enough for him to peek underneath. My mind screamed for me to jump up, to scream, to run, but I stayed still, my eyes barely open enough to see the faint outline of his figure in the moonlight. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard it, the soft clink of metal on glass. I dared to open my eyes a fraction and saw his hand holding a small vial. The liquid inside glinted faintly in the pale light seeping through the curtains. The velvet pouch. It was in his other hand. He opened it slowly, carefully, as though whatever was inside was fragile, or dangerous. I couldn't see exactly what it was, but the way he held it made my blood run cold. He reached toward my nightstand drawer, my nightstand where my glass of water sat. He uncapped the vial. The smell hit me first, bitter, chemical, sharp enough to make my nose twitch. In one smooth motion, he poured the contents into my water. I nearly sat up then, but instinct told me not to. If he knew I'd seen, if he realized I was awake, I might not get another chance to gather proof. He placed the glass back gently as though arranging flowers and whispered, "Sweet dreams, Maggie." Then he turned, walked out of the room and closed the door. I waited until I was sure he was gone before sitting up, my hands trembling so badly I almost knocked over the glass. My throat felt tight just looking at it. I pulled the baby monitor receiver out from under my pillow, heart racing. It had picked up everything, the sound of the vial, the glass, even his whisper. Proof. I set the glass aside, making a mental note to have it tested first thing in the morning. But even with this evidence, I knew Laura would need more. The pouch, the motive, the link to those offshore accounts. And now I had one advantage I hadn't had before. I knew exactly what he was willing to do. The next morning, I woke early and poured the tainted water into a travel bottle, sealing it tight. I tucked it into my handbag before Richard came downstairs. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said cheerfully, as if he hadn't tried to kill me in my sleep just hours earlier. "Morning," I said, matching his tone. "I was thinking of going into town today. Maybe browse some shops." He smiled. "Sounds lovely. Want me to drive you?" No, I said quickly. "I'll take the bus. You have your work after all." Something flickered in his eyes, suspicion. But he just nodded and went back to buttering his toast. In town, I headed straight for a small private lab run by an old friend, Dr. Helen Morris. Helen had been a toxicologist for the state before retiring to run her own business, and she owed me a favor from when I'd taken care of her mother years ago. When I showed her the bottle, her eyebrows shot up. "What is this?" "Something I need tested." "Quietly," I said. She didn't ask questions. Helen knew better than to press. "Give me an hour." While I waited, I sat in the small cafe across the street, my eyes constantly scanning the windows for any sign of Richard. Every time the bell over the door chimed, my heart lurched. Exactly an hour later, Helen called. Her voice was low, urgent. "Maggie, whatever was in that water. It's lethal. A high concentration of potassium chloride. Enough to cause cardiac arrest in minutes. And it would be almost impossible to trace as foul play in someone your age." My skin went cold. "So it would have looked like I just died in my sleep." "Yes," she said grimly. "Maggie, you need to go to the police. Now." I hung up and stepped outside, pulling my coat tighter. That's when I saw it, across the street, parked at the corner. The black Mercedes. My blood ran cold. Richard was sitting in the driver's seat, watching me. I didn't go to the police station. Not yet. If I ran straight there, he might follow, and I couldn't risk losing the element of surprise. Instead, I ducked into a crowded bookstore, winding my way through the aisles until I was sure he couldn't see me. When I came out half an hour later, the Mercedes was gone. That night, I didn't sleep in my room. I locked myself in the guest room instead, pushing a chair against the door. I kept my phone and the baby monitor beside me, every muscle tense. At 2:47 a.m., I heard the creak of footsteps again. This time they stopped outside the guest room door. Soft knock. "Maggie." His voice was calm, almost sweet. I didn't answer. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "I know you've been anxious lately." I stayed silent. The doorknob rattled. When it didn't open, there was a long pause, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating. But I didn't relax. Not until I heard the faint sound of the study door closing downstairs. The next morning, Richard was gone before I woke. I took my chance. I went into the study again, determined to find the pouch. It wasn't in the desk drawers this time. I searched the cabinets, the safe behind the painting, even the hollow space inside the old globe. Nothing. But then I noticed something odd about the rug. One corner was slightly raised. I pulled it back to reveal a small trap door set into the floorboards. It was locked with a heavy latch. My hands shook as I slid the latch open and lifted the door. Inside was a small metal box. I pulled it out, my breath quickening as I opened it. Inside was the velvet pouch. And next to it, a stack of passports. All with my picture. All with different names. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Richard was home. And his footsteps were heading straight for the study. The thud of the front door closing was like a gunshot in the silence. My pulse spiked. Richard was home early again. I glanced down at the metal box in my hands. The velvet pouch. The stack of fake passports. This was more than incriminating. This was dangerous. If he saw me holding them, I had no doubt my natural causes death would happen much sooner than he planned. A step. Low. Heavy. Heading toward the study. I shoved the passports into the box, tucked the pouch back inside, and dropped to my knees, forcing the trapdoor shut. My fingers fumbled with the latch. It felt like trying to thread a needle in the middle of an earthquake. Finally, it clicked shut, and I yanked the rug back over it just as the doorknob turned. "Maggie." His voice was light, but I could hear the question under it. I stood, clutching the edge of the desk for support. "Richard, you scared me half to death. I didn't hear you come in." He stepped inside, his gaze flicking around the room like a scanner. "What are you doing in here?" I forced a smile. "Looking for the address book. I wanted to send thank you cards to the ladies from church." His eyes narrowed. "The address book is in the kitchen drawer." Shrugged. "I thought maybe you'd moved it in here. You know, with all your important things." He studied me for a long moment. I kept my breathing slow, steady, the way I used to when I had to tell a patient bad news without letting my own emotions show. Finally, he smiled, that charming public smile that fooled everyone in Wilmington. "You're welcome to look anywhere you like, my dear." But he didn't leave. He walked around the desk, his hand brushing the rug. My stomach clenched so tight it hurt. "Feels like this corner's curling up," he said casually, pressing it down with his shoe. "We'll need to get that fixed." I murmured, keeping my voice light while every nerve in my body screamed. He straightened, stepped closer, and rested a hand on my shoulder. His grip was warm but firm, like a vice wrapped in velvet. "I'd hate for you to trip on it. We wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." My throat went dry. I forced a smile. "Of course not." After a pause, he let go. "Well, I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." I didn't move until I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. For the rest of the day, I played the part. I helped him sort mail, listened to his stories about donor luncheons, and even baked the apple pie he loved. But my mind wasn't on the pie. It was on the metal box under that rug. By the time night fell, I'd made a decision. I was going to get that box out of the house. If Laura could get her hands on it, it would be enough to start building a solid case against him. But the timing had to be perfect. That night, I pretended to be exhausted and went to bed early. I could hear him downstairs in the study, talking on the phone in that low, urgent tone he always used when he thought I wasn't listening. I waited until I heard the creak of his leather chair, a sound that meant he'd settled in, and the faint clink of ice in a glass. That was my window. Slipping from my room, I padded down the hallway, my socks silent on the hardwood floor. I stopped outside the study, pressing my ear to the door. "The Cayman account is secure," he was saying. "She won't be a problem much longer." "Yes, I'm sure." My jaw tightened. I moved quickly to the rug, lifting it just enough to unhook the latch. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the box as I pulled it out. I slipped into the hallway, hugging the box to my chest. My plan was to take it to the garage, stash it in the trunk of my old Buick, and get it to Laura first thing in the morning. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. Richard was standing at the bottom, looking up at me. His expression was unreadable. "What do you have there, Maggie?" he asked quietly. My mind scrambled for an answer. "Old photo albums," I lied. "I thought I'd look through them before bed." His eyes flicked to the box. "Funny. That looks like something from my study." "I found it in the attic," I said quickly. "Must have been sitting there for years." We stood there in silence, the air between us taut like a wire about to snap. Finally he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Bring it down here, won't you?" My legs felt like lead as I descended the stairs, each step measured, deliberate. I handed him the box, forcing my hands not to shake. He took it, his fingers brushing mine. "You should be careful poking around in old boxes," he said lightly. "Sometimes you find things you wish you hadn't." Then, without another word, he turned and carried it back into the study, closing the door behind him. I stood in the foyer, my knees threatening to give way. He knew. The next morning, I woke to find the study door locked and Richard gone. No note, no message. Just silence. Called Laura. "He has the box again." I almost had it, but he caught me. She swore softly under her breath. "Maggie, this is escalating. If he's onto you, you need to be somewhere safe. I can put you in a hotel under a false name tonight." I hesitated. "If I leave now, he'll know I'm running. And if he moves the box, we lose our chance." She sighed. "Then you'll have to keep playing along. But for God's sake, don't be alone with him in any situation where he controls the exit." Her words haunted me all day. That evening, Richard suggested we go for a drive along the coast. "It'll be nice to get some fresh air," he said. "Just the two of us." My gut screamed no, but my lips said, "That sounds lovely." We drove in silence for miles, the ocean glinting silver under the moonlight. Then, without warning, he turned down a narrow, unlit road I didn't recognize. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Just a place I like to think," he said. "You'll see." The road ended at a small overlook, the cliffs dropping sharply to the churning waves below. He parked, turned off the engine, and looked at me. "You've been restless lately, Maggie." Distracted. Almost secretive. Forced a laugh. "I'm fine. Just tired." He leaned closer. "You know I'd do anything for you, right?" "Yes," I whispered. His smile was slow, deliberate. "Good. Because trust is everything." He got out of the car, walked around, and opened my door. The wind off the ocean was cold, whipping my hair around my face. "Come see the view," he said, gesturing toward the edge. Every cell in my body screamed danger. But I got out, my feet crunching on the gravel, and followed him to the cliff's edge. The waves crashed below, the sound swallowing everything else. He stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my back. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "Yes," I murmured. And then I felt it, just the faintest pressure, like the beginning of a push. The wind whipped so hard it felt like it might carry me right over the edge without Richard even lifting a finger. His palm, resting between my shoulder blades, lingered there a fraction too long. That faint pressure. It wasn't enough to knock me forward, but it was enough to make my toes curl inside my shoes. I forced myself to look out at the waves below, their white foam thrashing against jagged rocks. It would be instant death if I went over. Instant. And to everyone else it would look like an accident. An old woman losing her balance on a windy night. I couldn't let him see I knew. "It is beautiful," I said, letting my voice drift a little, as if lost in the scenery. "You always know the best spots." He chuckled softly. "It's a gift." But his hand didn't move. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Richard," I said lightly, "do you remember when we went to Charleston and you took me to that rooftop cafe?" Of course. "That was the day I knew I loved you," I said, stepping just half an inch forward, away from his palm. "You surprised me with those little lemon tarts." He laughed again, and I felt the pressure ease as he pulled his hand back. "You and your lemon tarts." I smiled, turning to look at him. The moonlight caught his face just right, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the man I had fallen for. But then I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. Calculation. We walked back to the car, the gravel crunching under our feet. I made sure to keep my pace steady, my shoulders relaxed, even though every nerve was on edge. As soon as we were on the road again, he shifted the conversation to safe topics. Weather, charity events, the upcoming winter gala. He could be charming when he wanted to be. Too charming. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I had my mask firmly in place again. "Tea before bed," he offered as we walked inside. "I think I'll just turn in," I said. He studied me for a beat too long, then smiled. "Sleep well, sweetheart." Once in my room, I locked the door, shoved the dresser against it, and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone. My hands trembled as I texted Laura. "He took me to the cliffs tonight." I think he meant to push me. Her reply came in less than a minute. "We need you out now. Can you meet me tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the diner on Main?" I set the phone down, my mind racing. Tomorrow. I just had to survive until tomorrow. The next morning, I left early under the pretense of running errands. Richard was in his study, and I didn't want to give him any reason to follow me. I arrived at the diner 15 minutes early and took a booth in the back, my eyes scanning the parking lot. Laura arrived right on time, sliding into the seat across from me. "You look pale," she said immediately. "I feel pale," I replied. We ordered coffee, and then I told her everything. Every word from the cliffside, every flicker of his hand, every glance that made my skin crawl. When I finished, she leaned in, her voice low. "We're close, Maggie. I got someone looking into those offshore accounts. But we still need physical evidence tying him to the attempted poisoning and whatever identity scheme he's running." He nodded. "The velvet pouch and the passports." She hesitated. "Getting those will be dangerous. If you try again and he catches you." "I don't have a choice, Laura," I interrupted. "I'm living in that house. I can't spend every night wondering if the tea he brings me is the one that ends me." We mapped out a plan. I'd wait until Saturday, when Richard always spent the afternoon at his country club. I'd get the box, call Laura, and meet her in a public place. As I left the diner, a shiver ran down my spine. The hairs on my neck stood up. Across the street, a black Mercedes idled at the curb. Richard was behind the wheel, staring right at me. That night, he was unusually affectionate, pulling out my chair at dinner, pouring my wine, asking if I wanted to watch an old movie together. But beneath the warmth I could feel it. The watchfulness. The quiet assessment. Halfway through the movie I excused myself, saying I needed to use the restroom. Instead I went upstairs to check the baby monitor receiver I kept hidden. Static. And then his voice. "Saturday. She'll be gone by then." "No, I'm not worried." My pulse quickened. "Saturday. The same day I plan to take the box." I pressed the volume higher, straining to catch more. "Insurance policy will clear within a week." Cayman accounts are ready. My stomach dropped. Insurance policy. He'd taken one out on me. And if he was planning for Saturday, my window might close before I even had the chance to open it. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps outside my door. By morning I'd decided. I wasn't waiting until Saturday. I was getting that box tomorrow. The next day, I told Richard the first was going to visit an old friend in Raleigh. "I'll be back late," I said, giving him my sweetest smile. He kissed my cheek. "Drive safe." As soon as he was gone for his mid-morning meeting, I sprang into action. I went straight to the study, locked the door behind me and pulled back the rug. The latch clicked open under my fingers, and I lifted the trapdoor. The box was still there. I pulled it out, my breath quickening as I opened it. The velvet pouch, passports, and something new, an envelope with my name written in Richard's precise handwriting. Opened it. Inside was a death certificate. My death certificate. It listed the date as 2 days from now. Cause of death: myocardial infarction. Heart attack. My hands shook so hard the paper rattled. This was his plan. Neat, clean, and traceable. I snapped photos of everything, shoving the items back into the box. But as I straightened, I froze. The sound of a key turning in the front door. He was home. I shoved the box under my arm and ran for the back of the house, but the kitchen door was locked from the outside. My breath came fast and shallow as I darted toward the laundry room, thinking I could slip out the side. But before I reached it, Richard's voice called out, "Maggie!" A step. Getting closer. Had seconds. I looked around wildly, then spotted the crawlspace door behind the washing machine. Without thinking, I squeezed inside, clutching the box to my chest. Through the narrow crack, I saw his shoes stop just a few feet away. He stood there for a moment. Then his voice, low and dangerous. "I know you've been in my study." I bit down on the sleeve of my cardigan to muffle my breathing, hugging the cold metal box tight against my ribcage. Dust prickled my nose. One sneeze and I was finished. From the slit of light under the crawlspace door, I could see the toes of Richard's polished Oxfords planted on the laundry room tile. Heels slightly splayed, like a man bracing for patience he didn't actually have. "I know you've been in my study," he said, voice soft as steam. "Do you know how I know, Maggie?" Silence stretched. My pulse pressed at my throat. "Because the rug tells on you. You never learned the way it lays." He took one step, then another. The shoes vanished from my thin little window of sight. Drawers slid open. Cabinet doors thumped. A closet rod rattled as hangers scraped along it. I curled my toes inside my slippers, every joint in my hands aching from the angle I held the box, a stubborn weight I would not let go. The phone vibrated in my pocket. One sharp, shocking buzz. "Laura." I dared to shift the box just enough to free my hand, inching my phone out 1 millimeter at a time. The screen glow was a lighthouse in the dark. "Are you safe?" She'd texted. I typed in the smallest movements my old fingers could manage. "He's searching." Laundry arm. Hidden. Floorboard creaked. Froze. The phone's bright rectangle threatened to become a flare. I turned the brightness down until the words were almost invisible. "Have box with passports plus pouch plus envelope. He has a death cert with my name, date in 2 days. Potassium chloride last night confirmed by lab. 3 dots pulsing. Hold position," she wrote. "We're close. If he finds you, make noise, break glass, anything to create witnesses. Do not drink or eat anything he offers." The dots vanished. The house breathed. Then my name again, so gentle it hurt. "Maggie." I didn't answer. The warmth of his tone was a coat over barbed wire. A metal tool clinked on tile. He was closer. I pictured his hand on the crawlspace latch. I pictured myself being dragged out from this dark little mouth in the wall with a box in my arms like a child clings to a doll while a river takes both. I needed a distraction. The breaker panel was 3 feet to my left, on the other side of the drywall. I could reach an access cutout if I flattened myself and stretched. My hip popped in protest. My right shoulder burned. Still, I slid forward, ribs scraping wood, until my fingertip found the small plastic switch cutout I'd used once years ago when the dryer blew a fuse. My nail caught the edge. Counted to 3. Then flick. The house shuddered into darkness. Air system silenced, the subtle hum of the fridge gone, the water heater tick stopping like a skipped heartbeat. In the sudden quiet, I felt the old bones of the house settle. Richard cursed. One clean, sharp syllable he never used in public. Footsteps, 2, 3. Retreated toward the garage where the big breaker lived. I slid backward, hugged the box tighter, and waited for the smallest slice of safety to open. It came as a wedge of light from the garage door when he opened it to step down into that cool concrete cave. I pushed the crawlspace door with my slipper toe. It cracked open like a held breath. I slipped out, staying low, the world a soft hum of returning electricity as I scurried behind the washer, then the counter, then the hallway, every movement a prayer that his head would stay turned. The garage door thumped again, closed. I ran, old lady fast, which is just a series of stubborn little miracles, through the mudroom, down the back hall, past the butler's pantry, and into the sunroom. The French doors to the garden were locked. My hands shook the latch. The key, we kept it in the blue flower pot. I fished it out, scraped soil under my fingernails, slipped the lock, shouldered the door open, and stepped into the sun and birdsong and the neighbors' wind chimes as if I'd been born there. I cut across the lawn, the grass damp against my slippers, and ducked behind the tall boxwood hedge near the fence line. There I knelt in the warm dirt and did the ugliest, quickest thing. I buried the box. Not all of it. The velvet pouch. I slid that into my cardigan pocket. The envelope with a death certificate and a thin plastic keycard I hadn't noticed before. Coastal Bank SDB 317 stamped faintly on one side. I tucked those down the front of my blouse. The passports and the thumb drive under the passports I left in the box, covered with a plastic trash liner I'd snatched from the laundry room and then layered with leaves and damp soil until it looked like a place where nothing at all had ever been. A screen door squealed open somewhere behind me. Richard. A neighbor. I couldn't risk a peek. I stood, patted the dirt smooth with my slipper, and pinched my cheeks like I used to do before a hard shift. Put some life in you, Maggie. Then I walked back toward the house with the blank, pleasant face I wore to answer condolences 20 years ago when I buried my daughter. Inside, the hum of the house had returned. The fridge clicked back on. The hallway clock resumed its gentle talk. Richard stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, a dish towel in his hand as if he'd just finished wiping down the counter. "There you are," he said. I smiled, a bright apple pie thing. "There I am." "I thought the power went," he said, tossing the towel into the sink. "It did." I gestured toward the window like I'd been admiring Mrs. Carruthers's camellias the whole time. I was in the sunroom. Nearly dozed off in the warmth. He studied me. The soft places of his face where love used to live had become mirrors. I could only see myself reflected. Small, careful, stubborn. "Tea," he offered. "No, thank you," I said lightly. "I'm still full from breakfast." He smiled, the edges of it too sharp. "Suit yourself." He turned to the kettle. I leaned one hip against the counter. Casual, heart slamming at the inside of my ribs like a bird at a window. You're not getting me today, I thought. Not by cliff, not by glass, not by God-forsaken kindness. He poured hot water over a bag, stirred honey, the spoon tapping porcelain. Then he lifted the cup, sipped, and took his time enjoying his own brew. If there had been poison, it would have been for me alone. He liked control, to be precise. "Busy afternoon," he said without looking up. "I'll be at the club for a while. Planning committee for the winter gala." "That'll be lovely," I replied. "Wear the navy suit. I always liked you in that one." He glanced up, surprised maybe by the softness in my tone. I gave it to him like a ribbon on a package I'd already decided to cut open later. He left after lunch. I watched the Mercedes glide away, sunlight flashing on chrome like a wink. Then I locked the door, set the chain, and moved fast. First, the pouch in my cardigan. Inside, I found a thin glass ampoule wrapped in cotton, a syringe in a sealed sterile sleeve, and a folded note in tiny clipped handwriting. Draw 20 milliliters KCl. Slow push monitor. Stop heart in 60 to 120 seconds. Leave empty ampoule at hospital disposal. Like a recipe card for murder. Clean enough to frame a nurse like me. Second, the envelope in my blouse. I slid the death certificate into a clear plastic file sleeve from the office, snapped a photo of it on my phone, then took another of the keycard. Coastal Bank. Safe deposit basement printed in that impersonal gray that suggests only two things: money and secrecy. Third, the yard. I went back to the hedge, knelt, and made a little cross of twigs an inch above where I'd buried the box. Something the eye would skip if you weren't a grandmother who spent her life remembering where she put things no one else noticed. Then I called Laura. Her voice was granite wrapped in care. "Tell me everything." I did. I told her about the breaker, the run, the box under dirt, the pouch's little hospital of death, the keycard with the number that felt like a throat measurement. When I finished, my hand was shaking and I had to sit before my knees educated me about 82 in the rudest way. "Maggie, that key is the spine," she said. "If SDB 317 is what I think it is, it'll hold backups he can't deny. Statements, ledgers, maybe even signatures of his partners. And if the pouch instructions are in his handwriting, forensics can tie it to documents we already have on the Haven Foundation." "My hands were his once," I said quietly. "He trusted the nurse in me to know how to make a thing look natural. We'll use that against him. Can you meet me at Coastal Bank in 1 hour? I'll bring a warrant application packet. We won't be able to open the box without a judge, but we can get camera footage and log entries to show he accessed it." I hesitated. "He said he's at the club. We'll be quick. And we won't go near your house after. If he's watching the neighborhood." She let the sentence fall off a cliff we both could see. 1 hour, I said. I dressed like a woman running errands in Wilmington. Tan slacks, a pale blue sweater, the string of pearls my mother wore to church on Easter. I pulled my hair back under a scarf the color of salt water, and put on sunglasses large enough to make me feel like the world couldn't quite decide if I was me. Before I left, I went to the small maple box on my dresser, the one that held my daughter's things. A Polaroid sun-faded almost white, a Girl Scout badge, a scrap of a birthday card that read "to the best mom" in a wobble of crayon. I touched the card with the tip of my finger, like kissing a forehead you can't bend down to. "Stay with me," I whispered. "Just a little longer." Then I tucked the velvet pouch into my purse beside the envelope and keycard and stepped out into the Wilmington afternoon. Coastal Bank's downtown branch looked like it always had. Brick with white columns, flags snapping in the coastal wind, a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old money. Laura was already there, hair pulled back, blazer neat, eyes scanning without being obvious. "You look like a senator's aunt," she said. "You look like a cop pretending not to be a cop," I replied. "That's the goal." Her mouth twitched. "Let's work." At the receptionist's desk, I was the tired sweetness of a grandmother who has stood in a lot of lines and offered a lot of patience. "I'd like to check on my safe deposit, dear," I said, passing the keycard. 317. The receptionist smiled the way people do when you remind them of their favorite teacher. "Type." Her smile faltered. "We don't have an SDB 317 active under your name, ma'am." I widened my eyes at the card. "Oh my, that's odd. My husband handles these things." Chuckled. "Perhaps he filed it under a middle name. He gets so particular with paperwork." "Of course." Her brow pinched. "There is an SDB 317, but it's registered to a corporate entity, Harbor Light Holdings." Laura leaned in just enough to be friendly. "Would you be able to print the access log for that box? I'm helping Mrs. Langford reconcile some family records." She flashed her badge quick as a fish, then covered it with her palm as if she'd fumbled. "Happy to wait for a manager." The receptionist's eyes widened, dark with the sudden weight of small responsibility. "Let me get Mr. Pierce." While we waited, I stared up at the brass clock over the vault doors. Its second hand ticked like a little hammer on an anvil. I imagined it knocking open the lid of a coffin we hadn't yet proved existed. Mr. Pierce arrived. The kind of man who never looked surprised in his own building. "Detective," he said, nodding. "Ma'am." He took the keycard and turned it over in his fingers like he was reading Braille. "Harbor Light Holdings is a confidential client." Laura's politeness had a steel rod through it. "I'm preparing a warrant application. If I get it signed, I'll be back with officers. For now, a log and camera stills would help us avoid inconveniencing your clients in a broader sweep." He weighed the calculus of image versus law. Then he nodded once, carved and careful. "I can print the log. No stills without a court order. We'll take the log." Laura's smile didn't ask for more than she could keep. He vanished behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The lobby hummed softly with people counting their lives in slips of paper. I watched an elderly man fold a deposit receipt with the exact care he probably used to tuck his wife's letters into a drawer 50 years ago. Money is a love letter for the fearful, I thought. Says I can hold you if you fall. But sometimes it pushes. Mr. Pierce returned with a single-page printout. Laura took it, angled it so we both could see. Box 317. Accessed 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Each entry signed by R. Langford, as authorized representative of Harbor Light Holdings. Once on our anniversary. Once the night before last. Once this morning, 8:12 a.m. Half an hour before he drove home and found me in the sunroom. Laura whistled under her breath. "That's our timeline. May I have a copy?" asked, sweet as pie. Mr. Pierce hesitated. "For your records," he said finally, and slid a second print across the desk. Outside, the sky had gone that bright scrubbed blue that makes Wilmington feel like God washed it and set it out to dry. We walked down the steps side by side. "Next move," I said. "I get a judge to sign the warrant," Laura replied. "Tonight if I can. Tomorrow morning at the latest. We go into SDB 317 and collect everything. Meanwhile you do not." Her eyes cut to mine, urgent, kind. "Do not stay in that house tonight. He'll know I'm gone." "Good. Let him. He'll think you're nervous. It keeps him reactive." She squeezed my forearm. "I'll put you at the Harrington Inn under Whitfield. Back entrance. Room 212. You sound like you've done this before." "I have. I'd prefer to stop doing it by the time I'm your age." She glanced down the street, thoughtful. "One more thing. Keep the pouch on you. If we lose the box, that's enough to charge attempt when we tie it to his handwriting and the KCL analysis." We parted at the corner, her toward the courthouse, me toward my car parked under a ginkgo that was shedding yellow leaves like paper birds. I sat in the front seat and let my hands tremble where the world couldn't see. I should have driven straight to the inn. I should have gone to the back in trance and slept with the chain latched and the TV on low like a heartbeat you can argue with if you need to. Instead I drove home. I told myself it was for clothes and medicine and my mother's pearls and the paper with my daughter's crayon on it. I told myself I was old enough to be stubborn and young enough to get away with it, which is the kind of lie you only get to tell at 82 because you've earned the right to grade yourself on a curve. The house greeted me with its usual good manners. The foyer bright, the lilies-eyed arranged yesterday releasing their sugar-wrought perfume, the grandfather clock forgiving my lateness with a patient bong. I went upstairs, moved quickly. Jewelry, nightgown, the maple box with a crayon scrap, my blood pressure pills, the photo of Richard and me on the Charleston rooftop I was taking because I wanted to remember that somewhere in this mess had been a man who once held a lemon tart like it was ceremony. On my way back down, the baby monitor receiver hissed from the drawer where I kept it. I hadn't turned it on. But it was on volume low, feeding me the whisper of a voice in the study. "Tonight," Richard said. "Yes, I saw them at the bank." She wasn't alone. I stopped in the hall, every part of me suddenly a listening device. A second voice, the one I could never quite make out, replied. Short bursts of consonants like stones kicked down a driveway. Richard again. "No, not at the house. Too many variables. The gala. Toast at 9. Plenty of witnesses for grief." He laughed quietly, a sound like a soft cough. "Yes, of course, natural causes." Chair creaked. Paper slid. Zipper. Then, clear as a bell in the tinny speaker. Bring the little blue velvet pouch, Richard. It's sentimental. My hand went inside my cardigan pocket by reflex, closing around the pouch, hiding it like a mouse hides bread. I took a step backward. The stair tread complained, just enough. I turned slow, the way you do when the cat has already seen you and the best you can do is not be a mouse anymore. At the bottom of the steps, Richard stood in the foyer, phone in his hand, smile carved in. He'd been on speaker. He'd never been in the study at all. "You're home early," I said, the ridiculousness of the sentence so perfect I almost admired it. "So are you," he replied. His gaze flicked to the maple box under my arm. "Going somewhere?" "Laura wanted me to bring some family records by," I said pleasantly. "You know detectives, they love a paper trail." His smile cooled. "I do." Silence stretched between us. Tightrope, no net. "You know, Maggie," he said finally, stepping forward, "when I first saw you at that charity luncheon, I thought here is a woman who would never, ever lie to me." "People think a lot of things at luncheons," I said. He reached the bottom stair. Up close, I could see the tremor in his right eyelid, the way his left thumb pressed into his palm. A tell I'd learned the way you learn a spouse's sleep murmurings. "A toast tonight," he said softly. "To honor our work. To honor you." "I'm honored," I said. He leaned closer, too close, and breathed in like he was smelling whether I was afraid of him or only pretending. I let him smell the one thing I had left that was mine. Stubbornness. "I'll see you at 9, he whispered, voice so low it barely existed. "Where the pearls?" He turned and left through the front door as if I had never been standing there at all. The house hung the last of his cologne in the air like a lamp left on. I exhaled shakily, then moved. I slid the maple box into my tote, shoved my pills in a pocket, checked the pouch was still on me, checked the envelope, checked the keycard. Yes, 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 and then walked out of the house without looking over my shoulder. Looking back is a luxury. Looking forward is survival. At the Harrington Inn, room 212 smelled like starch and quiet. I set my things on the little round table, texted Laura. "He's planning the gala. Toast at 9. Says, natural causes. He knows about the bank." He saw us dot, and then stared at my phone until her reply came. Judge signed. Warrant in hand. We hit SDB 317 at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow. Tonight. You don't attend that gala. We'll cover. I stared at the words. My hand went to the pearls at my throat, an old habit though I wasn't wearing them yet. I typed, "If I don't go, he'll do it to someone else. Or he'll pivot." He said, "Witnesses for grief." 3 dots. Then, "We'll station 2 undercover inside. If you insist on going, you don't drink. You don't eat. You don't step on a balcony. You keep the pouch. And at exactly 8:55, you walk to me at the back service hallway and don't look behind you." Closed my eyes. I could feel the cliff wind again, cold on my cheeks. I could feel a hand between my shoulder blades and lemon tarts in Charleston, and a phone in the night that whispered how to stop a heart. "I'll be there at 8:55, I wrote. "I'll be wearing the pearls." I slept for an hour with the TV murmuring an old movie and my shoes still on like I might need to run. When I woke, dusk had begun its slow blue pour over Wilmington. I dressed in the navy dress with sleeves and a modest neckline, looped my mother's pearls around my throat, and pinned my hair in a soft twist that made me look like the woman I had been when the world still had edges you could trust. The winter gala bloomed at the Langford Center like money flowering. Music and white lights, waiters moving in the purposeful ballet of men trained to appear exactly when you think you might want something. I stepped through the doors and smiled at 36 people who thought a philanthropist's wife should smile like a foyer smells. I spotted Laura near the back, hair tucked, wearing a simple black dress that made her look like event staff. Our eyes met for a second. She touched her wrist. 8 o'clock. 40 minutes. Richard found me before I found a chair. Of course he did. He appeared at my elbow with that shapely smile, slid an arm to the small of my back, not too possessive, just enough to place me on the board, and guided me to a little cluster of donors near the string quartet. "Doesn't she look extraordinary?" he said to Mrs. Carruthers, who cooed and patted my hand and asked me if I'd share the lemon tart recipe at last, and then to Mr. Holloway from the bank board, whose hands were like maps of old roads, and then to the mayor, who had the unfortunate habit of leaving his mouth open while thinking what word should come next. I laughed in the right places. I did not drink the champagne that appeared in my hand like a conjurer's scarf. I lifted it to my lips and let bubbles kiss air, then set it on a passing tray when eyes moved. At 8:47, Richard tapped his glass. The quartet softened. Conversations fell off cliffs into quiet. "Friends," he said, voice warm and scalable, the kind of voice that pours itself into a room and fills all the corners with ease. "Tonight we celebrate what generosity can do. We celebrate the Haven Foundation's new shelter wing, the after-school programs, the medical debt relief fund we launched in July. Plus." He let it wash, then lifted a hand. "But most of all," he said, turning toward me with a tenderness he wore like a perfectly cut suit, "we celebrate the heart of this work, my wife Margaret. Her kindness, her courage, her belief that every person deserves dignity." Hush. He raised a second glass, the one beside his on the tray. 2 glasses, a match set. I glanced across the room. Laura had moved to the service hallway. 52. Richard smiled at me. The second glass gleamed. Pearls felt suddenly heavy. The velvet pouch in my purse seemed to hum. "Will you join me for a toast, Maggie?" he asked. The room held its breath the way people do when they're about to clap and want to make sure they get it right. I stepped forward. My hand hovered near the glass. In the curve of crystal I saw the chandelier doubled, the room bending. 54. Richard's eyes were the ocean the night he took me to the cliff, black at the center, white at the edges. "To love," he said softly, "and to all it allows us to do." I reached out and felt a hand close gently on my elbow from behind. Laura's voice low, almost not there. "Come with me now." Richard's smile didn't move. His eyes did. They shifted just a half-inch past my shoulder, where a woman in a server's uniform had appeared with a new tray of flutes, one of which had a faint, almost invisible, cloudy line swirling where clear should be crisp. 55. "Now, Maggie," Laura whispered, a plea wrapped in command. I turned, pearls biting my collarbone, and took one step with her toward the service hallway. And stopped dead. Because standing at the mouth of that hallway, blocking the narrow passage, was the tall man in the gray suit from the Haven Foundation, the one I'd heard in the back room talk about natural causes. He smiled, slow as an elevator. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Langford?" Behind me, the crystal chimed again as Richard tapped his glass, voice blooming back into the room like nothing at all was wrong. "To love," he repeated. The tray in the server's hands tipped, just enough to send one glass sliding toward the edge. And the world seemed to hold its breath as it fell. The champagne flute hit the marble floor and shattered into 100 glittering shards, the sound slicing through the low hum of polite conversation. All eyes turned toward the spill, gasps rippling through the crowd. It was the smallest, most ordinary accident in the world, and yet it was my only window. The man in the gray suit shifted his weight, glancing instinctively toward the noise. His eyes flickered away from me for less than a second, but it was all I needed. Laura's grip on my elbow tightened. "Go," she hissed. Moved. 1 step, 2. Sliding past him with a speed that felt impossible for my age, my body remembering old shifts in the ER when every second meant the difference between a life saved and a sheet pulled over a still face. He reached for me, but Laura stepped into his path, her badge flashing like a sudden blade of sunlight. "Detective Whitman, Wilmington PD. Try touching her, and I'll add assaulting an officer to whatever else is coming your way." His hand froze in midair. His smirk faltered just for a beat, and I saw something flicker there. Not fear exactly, but calculation interrupted. We moved quickly down the service hallway, my heels clicking softly on the tile. My heart hammered against my ribs, each thud a countdown to the moment Richard realized I wasn't beside him anymore. Behind us, the faint sound of his voice drifted down the corridor, smooth and warm, as if nothing at all had happened. "To love, my friends, and to the bright future we build together." I didn't have to look back to know he was smiling for them, scanning for me in his periphery. The kitchen at the end of the hallway was a blur of movement. Chefs plating desserts, waiters sliding past with trays, the hiss of burners and the clang of pans. We slipped into the chaos, weaving between stainless steel counters until Laura pushed open a heavy back door. Cold night air rushed over me like a baptism. I hadn't realized how hot my face had been until the wind cooled it. A black SUV was waiting at the curb, engine running. The driver, another plainclothes officer, leaned over and opened the back door. "Get in." I slid into the seat, clutching my purse to my chest, the velvet pouch inside pressing against my ribs. Laura climbed in beside me and shut the door. "Drive," she told the officer. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, I glanced out the tinted window. For a moment, through the crowd gathered near the glass doors, I saw him, Richard. He was standing perfectly still, one hand resting casually on the doorframe. His eyes locked on mine through the distance and the glass. He smiled. Low. Deliberate. It wasn't the smile of a man who'd been thwarted. It was the smile of a man who knew the game wasn't over. Laura reached into my purse without asking, pulling out the pouch. She unwrapped the cotton from around the ampoule and studied the syringe in its sterile sleeve. "This," she said, "is more than enough for an attempted murder charge once we tie it to the lab results. But we still want what's in that safe deposit box tomorrow morning. If we can connect the money, the passports, and the Haven Foundation's transfers, we'll bury him so deep he won't see daylight again." I nodded, still staring out the window. "He knew I was with you. He planned for the toast. If the glass hadn't fallen, you'd have been dead before dessert," Laura finished bluntly. "And half this city would have called it tragic but not surprising for a woman your age." Her words landed like cold stones in my chest. She was right. We pulled into the Harrington Inn's back entrance 20 minutes later. Laura walked me to my room and didn't leave until she'd checked every corner, every closet, every latch on the windows. "You stay locked in here tonight," she said firmly. "If anyone knocks, you call me first. Even if they say they're hotel staff." I promised her I would. But after she left, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, the keycard for SDB 317 in my hand, running my thumb over its smooth plastic. Somewhere behind a steel vault door downtown, the rest of the truth waited. And I had the awful feeling Richard already knew we were coming for it. At 5:30 a.m. my phone buzzed. "Laura, we're good to go. I'm outside." I was dressed and ready before I even replied. The city was just waking as we drove to Coastal Bank. Pale morning light spilling over the rooftops, the air crisp with a bite of early winter. Inside the branch, the manager was waiting with 2 uniformed officers. The walk to the vault was silent but heavy, the sound of our shoes on marble echoing in the cold, still air. At the far wall, the boxes gleamed in tidy rows. The manager stopped at 317. Laura handed me the keycard. "You open it," she said quietly. I slid the card into the slot. There was a soft mechanical click. The officer beside me pulled the box free and set it on the steel table in the center of the vault. For a moment no one moved. Then I lifted the lid. Inside were neat stacks of documents bound with rubber bands, 2 more velvet pouches identical to the one in my purse, and a small black notebook. On top of it all was a photograph. Me, taken from a distance, standing in the garden behind our house. And on the back, in Richard's handwriting, 2 steps ahead. For a long moment, no one in the vault breathed. The edges of the photograph cut into my fingertips as I stared at the looping black letters. 2 steps ahead. Laura was the first to speak. "That wasn't here yesterday." The bank manager blinked. "Mrs. Langford, the box is only accessible with the keycard and proper ID." I turned the photo over again, my stomach twisting. "He was here yesterday morning. It's on the log." Laura's jaw tightened. "And he wanted you to find this. He's taunting us." I set the photograph aside and reached into the box. The pouches rattled faintly when I lifted them, heavier than the one I'd kept in my purse. Inside the first, rows of ampoules nestled in cotton like tiny glass coffins. Each was labeled KCL in neat handwriting. The second pouch held wads of cash, US dollars and euros, rubber-banded into fat, tight bundles. Underneath the pouches was the black notebook. I opened it carefully, half expecting something to leap from its pages. Instead there were lists, amounts, offshore accounts labeled with cryptic initials. And beside more than one name, a small X in red ink. I didn't have to ask what the X meant. My nursing instincts and the ampoules told me enough. "This is a kill ledger," Laura said grimly, flipping through. "These people, they're not donors. They're marks. Most of them are elderly. All with assets. Some with foundations of their own." My eyes landed on a familiar name halfway down the page. Margaret Langford, projected clearance, 11/18, insurance secured. "That's tomorrow," I whispered. Laura snapped the notebook shut. "This is more than attempted murder, Maggie. This is a serial predator who's been hiding under a philanthropy brand for decades. And you were next in line." One of the officers began photographing the contents. I sifted through the stacks of documents. Shell company paperwork, property deeds, false IDs with Richard's photo under different names. And then I found it. A manila folder stamped Haven Foundation. Internal. Inside were transfer receipts. Millions moved from donor accounts to the same Cayman number over and over. Several bore my forged signature. The final page stopped me cold. It was a letter addressed to the board of the Haven Foundation, resigning me as treasurer due to ill health. Effective the day after tomorrow. The signature at the bottom was mine. Or rather, his version of mine. "He was going to kill me and then make it look like I stepped down voluntarily," I said, my voice shaking with equal parts fury and disbelief. Laura took the letter and slipped it into an evidence bag. "This is enough to arrest him today. We don't wait for the gala." I nodded, but unease tugged at me. "Laura, that photograph. How could he know we'd open this today unless—" He froze. "Unless someone told him." We left the bank with the evidence locked in a police case box. The SUV felt smaller on the ride back, the air thicker. "You think you have a leak," I said quietly. Laura didn't look at me. "We've had sensitive operations compromised before. But this? If he's been playing Wilmington society for decades, he could have friends in very high places. Even in uniform." My grip on my purse tightened. "So what now?" "Now," she said, "we move fast. I'll have a warrant out within the hour. We'll pick him up at the Langford Center before he can blink." We split at the precinct. Laura with the evidence, me to the Harrington Inn to wait for her call. I locked my door, closed the blinds, and sat in the armchair, watching the street through a slit. 2 hours passed. No call. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct made me answer. "Maggie." Richard's voice, smooth as silk over a knife's edge. My breath caught. "How did you get this number?" He chuckled. "Oh, Maggie. I've always had all your numbers. Room 212, Harrington Inn, isn't it? Quaint place." My heart slammed against my ribs. "What do you want?" "I want to congratulate you," he said, "for finding my little collection. You've done very well for a woman who used to think lemon tarts were the height of intrigue." I swallowed hard. "You're going to prison, Richard." Another chuckle. "Maybe. But you won't see it. Because while you've been playing detective, I've been taking care of unfinished business." My grip on the phone tightened. "What business?" There was a pause, just long enough to chill my blood. Then, "You'll find out at 9 tonight. I'd recommend being home for it." The line went dead. For a full minute after the call ended, I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear though the line was dead. 9 o'clock. Be home for it. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I lowered the phone, my mind turning over every possibility. 9 o'clock could mean anything. An ambush, a setup to make my death look natural, or something even worse. But Richard was arrogant. If he wanted me there, it meant he wanted to see me when whatever he had planned happened. And if I didn't show up, he might take out his unfinished business on someone else. I called Laura. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Panic pricked at the back of my neck. Was she tied up with the warrant? Or did that leak we suspected just get to her? It was 6:45 p.m. The sky outside was fading into that bruised blue winter twilight. I made a decision that any sane woman would call reckless, but sanity hadn't kept me alive this long. Instinct had. I was going home. The streets were nearly empty as I drove. Wilmington in winter could feel like a ghost town after dark, but tonight, every shadow seemed to lean toward me. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 8:50, my headlights sweeping over the familiar white columns of the front porch. The house looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lilies, fresher than the ones I'd arranged days ago. He'd replaced them. Why? I stepped into the foyer, shutting the door softly behind me. Richard. My voice carried up the stairs and came back to me unchanged. In here. His voice called from the dining room. He was seated at the head of the long mahogany table, dressed in his navy suit, a glass of red wine in front of him. The chandelier above cast warm light over the gleaming silverware and a table set for two. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I stayed standing. Where's Laura? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Busy, I imagine. But this isn't about her. This is about us, Maggie. One last dinner before we put all this unpleasantness behind us. I glanced at the wine glass set at my place. The liquid inside was dark, rich, and in my mind already poisoned. I'm not thirsty, I said. He tilted his head. Always so suspicious lately. I miss the woman who trusted me. That woman's gone, I replied. You killed her when you forged her signature, when you poured poison into her glass. His eyes hardened just for a second before the smile returned. You've been busy. Bank vaults, notebooks, photographs. And yet, I'm still here. I took a step closer, keeping my voice steady. Not for long. Laura has everything. The ledger, the ampoules, the death certificate you prepared for me. He laughed, a low, genuine laugh. Oh, Maggie, do you think I didn't account for that? Do you think the people she works for want me in prison? I've kept half their secrets for 20 years. They'll bury your evidence before it ever sees a courtroom. My stomach dropped. A leak. He wasn't bluffing. He was telling me plainly that he had protection in high places. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. 59. Richard followed my gaze and smiled wider. Almost time. For what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. You'll see. The clock began to chime. On the fourth chime, there was a loud, sharp knock at the door. Richard's smile widened. Right on schedule. I moved first, darting into the foyer before he could stop me. I yanked the door open. And there was Laura, flanked by two uniformed officers, warrant in hand. Maggie, step aside, she said firmly. The officers swept past me into the dining room. Richard didn't resist. He simply stood, smoothed his jacket and said, Gentlemen, I assume you have the wrong man. Laura met his gaze. We'll let the judge decide that. As they cuffed him, he looked over his shoulder at me. No fear, no anger. Just that same infuriating calm. 2 steps ahead, Maggie, he said softly. Always. They led him out into the cold night. His voice fading into the dark. Laura closed the door behind them, locking it. We got him on the ledger and the ampoules. The DA's already on board. But he's not wrong, he's got friends. This trial's going to be a war. I nodded slowly. My hands were still trembling, but I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Control. I've fought wars before, I said quietly. And I'm still here. Laura gave me a small smile. Then let's make sure you stay that way. The house was silent again. Outside, the taillights of the police car disappeared into the night. I knew this wasn't over. Not until every one of his friends was exposed. But for the first time in a long time I could breathe. And tomorrow, I'd start planning how to take those last 2 steps myself. Speech balloon, if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, imagine what's coming next. What would you do if you discovered the person you loved most was planning your death? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And if you want more true-to-life suspense like this, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Because the next story might just be more shocking than this one.